Hello, with the fourth episode of the Intertextual Animal, where I'm exploring textuality on the web. Today, I'm very happy and curious to have Frode Hegland with me to talk about texts, interactive understandings, and other interesting things. Um, Frode is currently on a PhD program at the University of Southampton under the supervision of Wendy Hall and Les Carr, and which is the thing that excites me more about his projects is that he's working on concepts such as interactive text, the way.
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah.
Press the button and keep going.
Yeah.
No one's
Okay.
gonna mind.
So he's also working on a project, which is a book where he will be collecting pieces of texts from different authors, from different domains. I will share the link within the transcript of this talk later. And so today I will be weaving a text with him for you to get to know his work and the workings of his mind, maybe. Hi, Frode.
That was big expectations there. Okay, it'll be an interesting dialogue as we've had in the past. So, yeah, thanks for talking.
My first question is, what is your personal definition of text?
Oh, that's very easy. I don't always use the term text. Doug Engelbart, when he talked to me about this, he preferred symbol manipulation. So when I talk about text, I really am talking about some kind of lines on a surface. I'm not talking about the text in a wider picture. Text and pictures are very different. However, of course, they can work powerfully together. But I don't mean I stray in a very dry definition, and I think that relates to what you do because the other media is getting a lot of attention and a lot of funding. So I don't really feel the need to go outside of the really, really basic definition of text.
Okay, so I will need to rephrase my second question, which is what discerns the digital symbol, the digital lines on a surface from the lines on a stone or in print?
I'd like to discuss that, of course, but I wrote a note based on our pre-chat. You mentioned you were talking to someone and you had a hard time getting to talking about actual text. Mm-hmm. I've had this problem for decades, and it feels like you want to talk about a window, the glass in the window. People will not do that. They will talk only about what they see through the window.
Wow.
So it's kind of, they don't, or it's almost like you and me, we both wear glasses. It's like talking to someone, say, can we talk about your glasses? Well, look, there's a car over there. Mm-hmm. You know, it is so transparent to most people. They haven't cottoned onto it. And it's a very strange thing. My wife and I, we renovated our house that we bought over the last year. So our vision has changed. So we have had to buy lamps. You know, this is the big house for the rest of our life where our son is going to grow up. So what does that mean? We have to figure out what does that mean? What are lamps? You know, when you're not buying a lamp for a house in a specific way, it's a thing that hangs up there, and the way our mind creates stories, we don't go into a room and stop and look at all the details. We have to ignore almost everything. So I think it's very similar with text. People read text in the same way they go into a hotel lobby. There's expectations of how to get through it, but it's really, really, really hard until you have a very specific interest to notice there's a carpet on the floor. How do you walk over the carpet? Is it too thick or is it thin? Is a color useful for navigation? All these issues only an interior designer would look at.
Okay.
So to get people to look at interactive text is really, really hard. Some people, in my experience, focus on the typography, which is hugely important, other on the design, again, hugely important. But when it comes to interactivity, that is now getting into your question. The substrate of text is what you're talking about, of course. And it's a fantastically interesting history. I don't mean to be patronizing to you by saying things I'm sure you know, but just in context to answer your question. The different stages of the pen and paper, so to speak, the tool and the substrate, have given very different opportunities for what writing can be. It's very different to edit a dry clay tablet from a wet dry tablet. Similarly, the story of papyrus is interesting. But what's also kind of neat, there is a current, as in early 2019, exhibition at the British Library, which is partly on the history of text. It's called Making Your Mark. Some of the items in there are hugely moving to see. One of them is of a kind of a sphinx, and it's from the turquoise mines of Sinai. That's where alphabetic writing happened for the first time, and the only time in history. It was Egyptian slaves, Mesopotamian slaves, everybody from the region had to figure out a way to communicate. So they took prior marks, and instead of having meaning around them, they made sounds. So that's amazing to actually see that in the flesh. But there was something else, much more recent, medieval manuscript that was on vellum, meaning, of course, animal hide. And that was nice to see and so on. But then we were lucky enough to be there on the press day. So the academic advisor was there, and he pointed out that you can see kind of edits a little bit when they made a mistake in these beautiful illuminated manuscripts. So at the time, for legal documents, they used a different animal. They used sheep, because sheep has a layer of fat above the skin. So that means that if you make a mark and you change it, you can instantly see you've destroyed it. Mm-hmm. But this goes into our digital substrate discussion, of course, because digital text can be anything that can be visually shown on a display of some sort. The question is, in what way can it be useful? So that's why I'm investing a lot of my time trying to figure out the human visual system and so on. Had some very interesting conversations with people, but there's also, again, really, really hard to get things useful out of this, because we're really dealing with unknown unknowns. So a lot of this will become incredibly obvious in retrospect, I think. The key thing about symbols rather than pictures, though of course machine learning is changing this about pictures a bit, is symbols can be operated upon. Mm-hmm. You can do a simple thing like show me all the words in this document that have all the sentences that have the word Coca-Cola in them, for instance. That's a kind of magic that happens because of the computer and because it's a symbol.
When you mentioned that you're looking into the ways digital text can be useful, and then you went to machine learning, this is where, in between that window, I thought that one of the ways text can be useful is through its other phase, the code behind it. Do you look at the code behind the text as a text?
I accept that it is, absolutely, and I think there are things we can learn, but I am not a coder. In the same way that I would say I'm more of an architect than a builder. I feel my job is to represent the user and argue with a very good builder. When you're talking about text as code, I do think that we need to get to closer. We need to get to stages where we can write almost programmatically, though. For instance, in Wikipedia or something, if you write, tomorrow I will have a meeting with Frode. Once that date hits, because it knows when it was written, it should say something like, I was scheduled to have a meeting with Frode on the 13th of May. But of course, the reader or the author should be able to constrain if those changes happen and so on. That's what I mean by you're writing in a way that the system can semantically understand. Brett Victor had some great demos of things he did at Apple, where you could write mathematical functions in a normal page and then click on the text to change the formula. So that is very cool, very useful. We should be able to do similar things with text.
Yes, I agree. I recently stumbled upon a letter, a cover letter, which was pre-programmed for the writer to write. Like you need this paragraph and then you can choose from. And this lets your creativity um, expand within certain format, which is a good thing.
I think that's really, really cool. For the word processor that I'm building, Author, at some point I do want to include real templates, primarily for students. So let's say you have a science homework template. Why should the student have to think about, oh, did I remember this section? Of course, okay, you can justify why a student would have to struggle, but why in the world should a teacher have to go through manually every document to find all the relevant bits? So yes, even though digital is very, very flexible, templates and structured means to enter stuff can be extremely useful, absolutely.
Tell me more about Author.
Okay, I just changed it this weekend, so it's a very good time. I'll tell you the design problem first. Liquid Author is a word processor that I started not long after Doug Engelbart passed away, because I felt, to me, in my world, owning a Ferrari is whatever. If you like cars, a Ferrari I'm sure is fine. But for me, building my own word processor is the most amazing thing I could imagine. It is the way that I've been growing up in that era of using these things. Now we have a lot of APIs and abilities available to make it. That's incredible. So I decided I had to do a project that was bigger than me, would take more money than I have, would take more effort and more time. So this is a very much an ongoing project. So the first thing that I want to tell you about, before I tell you about the new thing, is I really didn't like the idea that in a document or a book you have a table of contents that is separate. In a digital environment, I find that offensive, because we have PDFs are useful for semi-legal documents that, you know, this is what was written down. We're doing everything we can to make it non-interactive. It's fine for certain uses, but for anything else, for deep reading or whatever, it's horrible. It's just what Doug Engelbart didn't call WYSIWYG, but WYSIWAG. What you see is all you get. So with truly digital text, my brother, he's a theater director. He uses his hands a lot. You know, I can't talk to him without him constantly moving his hands, and it's actually inspiring, because we have a little trackpad or a mouse, but his world is here. So I really want to put that in. So the multi-touch trackpads on the Mac, I think, are absolutely amazing. So what happened was that Author went through, I think, 5 different developers, or people who just got burnt out, or what they didn't get it, or whatever. One of the first versions was iPad. So on an iPad, trying to develop it completely for that medium, I decided that if you pinch the text, it should collapse and only show the headings. So that means that the table of contents headings and the headings on the document is actually the same thing.
Okay.
That, to me, is really, really important. Because if you then think of the document not as, you know, here's a table of content, here's a document, like some do, you have things on the side. It's so disconnected. It's, of course, in virtual worlds, we can do completely magical, disconnected things. But also our mental structures need something to hold on to. So that's why, for me, if this is the document and this is the outline, it's the same thing. It's a kind of a sculpture. Mm-hmm. So what I've been working on for a long time, okay, 6 months at least, intensely, is, so you do the pinch in, but what about the other way, doing a pinch out? what magical stuff can we have happen there? So for my PhD, I'm working on augmenting students, postgraduate students, to do their literature reviews, because I think it's awful the way it is now. By the way, are we frozen? You're very still.